Faith can feel like hearts and butterflies until someone lights a match and burns it all to the ground. Welcome to the Burning Butterflies podcast.
The sad thing is that there's abuse of every kind within the church. But the spiritual abuse is the stuff that just
What's a place there shouldn't be abuse? Like, there just shouldn't be abuse in a place that claims Jesus.
Well, it ruins your soul. If you're new here, we suggest listening to our prologue episode first. This is the story of two women's journey through spiritual abuse and escaping from toxic church culture while finding hope in Christ.
Sometimes it's just the facts, and if you get offended by it, that's a you issue. And if we can't be mature enough to have these conversations, even if some of the topics are difficult, then shame on us.
Welcome to chapter 2. Oh, okay. At this point, though, seriously, I feel like before we dive back into our stories, since our worlds have collided, now we're going to start playing church. But before we dive into our stories, I feel like it's very important for our listener to have a foundational rooting in church history. Because for us, coming out of, well, how did this happen? Why did we do the things we do? Once we had an understanding of how the history of the church has greatly influenced and affected our belief systems, things that we think are like fundamentally Jesus and fundamentally biblical aren't any more than 200 years old.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, exactly.
And like, why do I believe the things I believe? And I don't know if I said it on this podcast or the other podcast or just in life, but when I really sat down and I understood these things, I realized that my theology and my belief system was a melting pot of so many different doctrines and theologies and philosophies. And I'm like, oh my goodness. And half of it wasn't even biblical.
Yeah,
It's like, and now I'm like, oh, we've done ourselves such a disservice. So for this episode, my friends, we are going to allow our resident historian.
Oh, that's a big title.
We have producer Brandy and our resident historian, Amanda, is going to bullet point the history of the church for us. Hang on, because this is going to be super, super fab. All right.
Yeah, so I'm going to kind of rapid fire this just because no one wants a 3-hour long episode.
3 hours of the 200 years of American church history. Ready, go.
So I'm going to kind of bullet point this. We are going to go a little bit more in depth. So if this is something that you're really interested in and you're really into, we're going to do this over on our Patreon. Go more in depth into each of these things and kind of discuss them a little bit more. So I'm just going to kind of bullet point this. I want everyone to look at these with the mindset of how did the church get to where it is? We said in the beginning, even in our prologue episode, we talked about how we are discussing the Americanized church that is mostly, conservative, evangelical. Like, how did we get to this point? How have we gotten here? And so I'm going to kind of go back. Most of this is going to be American church history, but I think there's a few things to point out, even why we even have American church history.
Right. How did we get to America? We got here at some point.
Yeah. So how did we even get here? So in the 1440s, the Gutenberg press is invented, right? Huge thing, revolutionizes the world. And so for the first time, people are able to have the Bible.
Yeah, first printed on the first printing press was the Bible.
In a more affordable way. People had Bibles, but they were hand scribed. And it was something that like your family had and you passed down through generations and things like that. This made it more accessible to the masses, right? So then you have in 1492, Columbus sails the ocean blue, right? Now we know
I did a
Columbus.
good job at not singing the song this time. Every other time that Amanda has been like, in 1492, I'm like, "Woo, we're singing a song."
Yes. So we know now Columbus was kind of a skis, right? Like he was not a good human. Um
Leif Erikson Day.
yeah, so he came over here mostly with the Spanish missionaries. And he got the Spanish to kind of foot part of the bill under the guidelines that he's going to bring some Spanish monks with him and they're going to save the heathens wherever they go, right? It's also important to point out that King Henry VIII in the 1500s pretty much started the Church of England. And he started that because, so he had a wife who couldn't give him a male heir. She was the widow of his brother.
Mhm.
And so he had married her like out of
Right, 'cause
that
that's what we have to
obligation.
do, yeah.
Yeah. And so he decided that God was mad at him. God was mad at him because he married his
His brother's
dead
wife,
brother's wife.
yeah.
And so that's why he can't have a male heir. She was giving him heirs, just not a
Just
boy.
not males, yeah.
Yeah. And so he had a side piece named Anne Boleyn, and he decided he wanted to ditch his wife, Catherine of Aragon, and he wanted to marry the side
Oh,
piece.
yes, Anne Boleyn.
The Pope was like, that's not happening. We're not doing that. So King Henry is like, screw you guys. I'm taking my ball and I'm going home. And he starts his own church. And one of the first things he does is he annuls his marriage to Catherine of Aragon and grants himself divine permission from God to marry Anne Boleyn. And in doing this, he sets up the Church of England. And that church, he basically sets all of his own rules and everything. People are already paying taxes to England. Now they have to pay their tithes to the Church of England. And guess where that goes?
To the king.
Same place. Exactly. So this kind of sets up this mindset of we want freedom of religion.
Right.
This is where this is coming from.
Right.
We're fine with paying our taxes. We're fine with paying our tithes. We just don't think they should go to the same
guy.
The same dude.
And knowing this just makes, the Boston Tea Party make a little bit more. Now you understand why these revolutionaries were like, we're done giving you all of this money.
Yeah. And we're willing to fight with our lives for it. Yeah. Yes. So in 1517 was the Protestant Reformation. And basically it was like coming out from under the mostly Catholic Church of England. In 1608, Jamestown, Virginia is founded. In 1619, Jamestown has, if you put it in today's terms, they have essentially a satellite church of the Church of England.
Yes.
And so the Church of England sends 22 clergymen over here to better establish the church, but most importantly, to collect the tithe money to make sure it's getting sent back to England. When the first church was over here, they were letting women do things. And so when these 22 clergymen came over, they were like, absolutely not. Women are not allowed to do anything. 1620, the Pilgrims settle under Mayflower Compact. If you remember back to like elementary social studies, most of these Pilgrims were Puritan separatists. They were very anti-Catholic. They believed baptism was a pledge of faith, not salvation. They denounced confession. They denounced ordination. They even denounced marriage. Like these Puritans were like, you had to be chosen to behave in godly ways. They believed in all of these things. They also believed that women could be leaders, that the pastors and teachers were mostly men who oversaw the spiritual needs of the church, but then elders could be women who were assisting the pastors and the teachers, and deacons and deaconesses oversaw the physical needs of the church. So they established colonies. This is really important. So like, this is kind of a rough generalization. This isn't like a hard and fast rule, but for the most part, Virginia was ground zero for the Church of England in America. It was not well attended. It was mostly the rich people believed in it because, hey, it's worked for us up until this point. So it was mostly a way for the rich to control the poor. The Massachusetts, New England area, these were more the Puritans. They focused on purity through worship and doctrine. They believed that you're either pure evil or you're pure holy. There's no in between ground. They believed that they were chosen by God to live this life. So it was very us versus them. Absolutely 100% women's only focus was piety. Kind of the be seen and not heard, be there to serve, be just the quiet, holy, pure woman. The Rhode Island, Delaware, Pennsylvania areas, those are more open to religious tolerance. They were considered a safe haven for people who were the religious refugees of other colonies. This is where we really see the rise of Quakers, Dutch, Amish, Jewish, Lutheran, Jehovah's Witnesses. Like those belief systems in America can point their roots back to these areas. So 1664, British troops occupy New York. Also during this time in Massachusetts, which again, remember, women are supposed to be focusing on piety in this area. This is the Salem witch trials in 1692.
Yeah, I was like, ooh.
So any woman with a mouth, any woman with an opinion
was a witch.
was a witch.
I was a witch.
I would have been burned at the stake for so many reasons.
I don't know at what age, but maybe 3. As soon as like
so many
formulate
reasons.
a sentence.
I'm left-handed, so I would have been screwed from the get-go.
Yeah,
So
I was too, but because of that, I was forced to switch to. So like I said, I would have totally been. Yeah.
So 1730 through the 1740s, this is considered the first Great Awakening in the American church. They're calling back people to come back to church, right? I find this hilarious. If anyone has seen the Barbie movie, Ken believes that patriarchy is where men on horses rule the world.
Yes.
In the 1630s, men on horses would ride around the countryside and deliver sermons. But they would only deliver sermons to the rich and the white. They were designed to invoke like emotional responses, like we want to save your soul, repent, you heathens, like think that kind of.
Yeah, this was very fire and brimstone.
Yes. Yeah. During this time frame also is the start of like the Methodist, the Baptist, the Presbyterian mindset in America.
I think right here too, because is a very good place to point out and just a reminder that like in America, we have like over 41,000 different denominations.
Yes.
And every single one thinks that they are the only ones.
And they're the only ones, yeah.
And so like we're right now in this time of American history where all of these different denominations are coming forth. And that just shows me and tells me that there's a lot of disagreement on what is actually right versus wrong in that sense.
Yeah. In terms of interpreting the Bible.
Right.
And what is right and
Like
what is godly, what is holy.
We have Native Americans in America to we have the Church of England to now you're at like 35 different denominations you've just listed practically.
Yeah. In 100 years.
100 years.
Yeah. 1770s. If you remember back to 8th grade history, this is Stamp Act, Boston Tea Party, Boston Massacre, all that stuff goes down. So 1776, American Revolution. This really split Christians because some Christians believed in being pacifists. This whole like, well, God put this authority over us. We need to honor this authority, that kind of thing. Then you have the mindset of like, no, we are chosen by God. This is our land. Like we will take it. We are warriors, soldiers in the army of the Lord and all of that kind of stuff. But I find it really interesting how we are so quick at this point in time to be like, our country is founded on the blood and beliefs of these noble Christian men who rose up to fight the big evil England, and secure our rights as Christians. Only 17% of Americans even attended church. Not like Christian church, just church in general.
At all, during this time.
Yes.
Like this is our one nation under God, founded on biblical principles, but in reality,
17%
at the time
of
in
people
history,
are practicing anything.
17% of people are going to any church
Yeah.
at all.
Yeah. Again, not just Christian, any church. So 1780s, the church is struggling. They've they've gained a little bit of ground. 20% of Americans are considered to be part of a church. Um, Again, this is non-slave, non-Indian. We're only talking about white people here. They're having a hard time getting their churches going. We have this newly founded movement that we are our own country, we can do our own thing. So some of these people come and they're like, maybe our new country needs to run the church. And so then this causes another huge divide because you have people who are actively trying to get churches going, actively trying to point people to God and to Jesus, and they're like, we need help. Can the government run this? And then you have people that are like, this is the whole reason why we left England and why we're
Right.
fighting this fight.
Right. And we're in a time too where like transportation, isn't as prevalent as it is today. And people's houses are houses are far apart and
Yeah.
communities are small and close knit. And I mean, this is a different time. This isn't like today they're trying to do this.
Yes.
But I think it's interesting that their answer, so they have men on horses, like we're going around door to door. I mean, it might be miles between people's houses, but we're going door to door. We're trying to convince everybody that church is the thing. And then their answer is still, let's get the government involved.
Yeah, exactly. Um, so there's this huge, but at this time, our country is in turmoil. I think a lot of times we look at it like 1776, we fought this war, oh, we won, yay. The next week, we're signing the Declaration of Independence. Like, the Constitution didn't even take effect until 1789.
Wow.
And so, I mean,
That's a lot of years of a lot of stuff
we have
going
a
on.
lot of years where our country is kind of like, we don't know what the hell we're doing yet.
Right. We don't know who we are. We haven't found our
We're
identity.
throwing stuff at the wall to see what sticks,
Right.
kind of thing, right? The 1790s, this is when the invention of Sunday school happens. I think of Sunday school like I'm sure I think of it like how you think of it. Like when you're a little kid, you go to Sunday
Yeah.
school, right? Yeah. So that's mostly how we think of it now. Is Sunday school is for kids. Well, Sunday school started for adults, mostly just to try to get
People to go.
people
Interesting.
and get people again, we're starting these new movements of these ideas of these different denominations. And so,
You have to go and learn about what you're going to
yeah,
believe.
I'm not saying America invented being a Methodist or being a Lutheran or anything like those ideas were there. I'm saying like this is the rise of these denominations in America.
In America, yeah.
And it was very much like, well, you're a Presbyterian. Well, why are you that?
So do you think that it was more just your outside opinion here of like, were we trying to give people a reason to find value in church? Because if you're talking about over the years, we had 17%. What were these people doing? Where's the value in going to church? So did they have to like bring that about?
Yes. And you have, well, and then remember, you also have immigrants coming over. Like, so you have more and more people coming because this is the rise of like, we are our own country. We're
Yeah.
doing our own thing. So people start migrating over here. The church I attended as a little kid as the Lutheran it was called the First English Lutheran Church.
Oh, okay.
And it was called that because people who spoke German came and they learned English at church. So they were using that connection of the Lutheran church. We're going to teach it. We're going to do the service in German, but then we're going to repeat ourselves in English and we're going to teach you English through church.
Yeah.
So
Totally different times. Like, my
yes.
goodness.
So you have a lot of this going on where you're right. We're trying to have people find value in the church.
Yeah, 'cause
And
I just kept thinking, how do you get the farmer
and have
on a
the
Sunday morning? You have
Yeah.
to provide value.
and have the church be something that's valuable for the community as
Yeah.
well. So again, that's the 1790s. This is like where we get the Bill of Rights and the start of westward expansion. We are moving west.
We're going westward home.
In 1800, the government moves to Washington, D.C. It was in New York City prior to that. This is where we also see a huge thing because just a couple years before this, in 1798, the Pope was led into exile publicly. and it was a huge.
Oh, we exiled the Pope?
We
Well,
exiled
we
the Pope.
didn't, but they exiled their Pope?
Yes. So it's a huge thing. So there is heavy anti-Catholic movement
Yeah.
happening worldwide at
Wow.
this time. So now we have this mindset of like, are you a Calvinist? Are you an Arminian? And all of these things, right? Again, I'm gonna go into like on Patreon, I'll explain all of that. So if this is your jam and you're super intrigued, like
Yeah, jump onto Patreon and we'll
yeah,
have episodes there
we're gonna
coming.
give you the highlight reel right now. 1801. This is where we get the idea of the separation of church and state. Is in October of 1801. Baptists are really upset because they have to pay congregational fees to their congregational majority.
Okay.
Like basically they have to pay to be a part of like the Baptist.
Right. It's their Baptist membership.
Yes, right.
Okay.
They wanted each individual congregation to be able to basically operate individually and run their own affairs, and they didn't want to have like
The governing
the
board.
governing
at the
board.
big-
Yes.
Yeah.
And so they go to Jefferson at the time, and they're complaining. And they're using the First Amendment, which said, respecting the establishment of religion, one should be free to exercise religion without government coercion or discrimination. So it's basically you should be able to practice your religion in any way you want without the government's
Involvement, yeah. Coercion.
coercing you into one religion or another, or discriminating against you because of your religion. Take note, this does not say Christianity. This says religion. Any belief system at all. So Jefferson says, well, yeah, I believe there should be like a wall separating the church and the government.
Yeah.
So
Jefferson said it. This
freedom is not absolute because separation of church and state does not exist in the Constitution.
No.
It is not a constitutional thing. It basically, the First Amendment is the government has to remain neutral about religion. The only time the government intercedes is when something is considered unconstitutional. So there's only been 3 times, 3 scenarios where the government intervenes. One is polygamy, because, I mean, the
government has an opinion about that.
And, well, and it's worked out so well for the fundamental Mormon movement at this point in history. You can't use snakes,
right?
Like, because they're poisonous and it's dangerous, right? And you can't use hallucinogenic drugs.
Yeah.
Turns
out the government has an opinion about religion. Those are the 3 opinions it has.
Yes.
And that's it.
Yeah, you can't make people hallucinate. You can't make them handle.
You can't put them in a dangerous situation
snakes,
with a poisonous snake. Yeah.
And you cannot marry underage women.
Yeah.
And
multiple.
And multiple of them. Yes. So that is all of this goes down in 1801. 1816 is known as the year without summer. It is unseasonably cold across the country. Crops do not grow properly. There's famines, there's illnesses. People are having to stay indoors more because it's cold, and they're getting more illnesses because they're in close proximity with each other. It's not a great thing that's happening. People are convinced this is because God is punishing us. So
of course it is.
This mindset that, America is down the toilet and it's gone to where it's gone now in 2024 because we have turned our backs from the Lord. This is not a new idea.
No.
In 1816, people believed that
this exact same narrative.
U.S. was suffering because
God's mad at them.
Because God's mad at them. Exactly.
Well, which it may be true, but it's not a new thing.
So this launches the temperance movement. We can't have people, canoodling with each other outside of marriage. We can't have people drinking.
Yeah, we got to get our act together because God's
Yeah,
mad. So we have to get back to the straight and narrow
yes.
path.
But this also is the time of the age of scientific discoveries in America. Like, we're making scientific discoveries left and right. Um, so 1830s, you have a lot of really crappy stuff go on, like the American Indian Wars, Trail of Tears, Indian Reformation Act, Catholic boarding schools for Indians ran by, priests and nuns that basically were just, horrible, um, abusive situations that like were going to force you to learn how to be white. And they're using the guides of like, we are showing the heathens who God is, and we're teaching them to be civilized and proper. Um, and it was just, that was an awful time in Christian history in America. In 1838, for the first time ever in America, women are allowed to vote on a matter. And it was on a school board in New York. And they decided because it was mostly women teachers, women should be able to decide who was going to be on the board.
Yeah, women are responsible to raise kids and educate them, so they should be able to
Yeah.
have a
So
vote.
they should have a say of who the men were.
Who the men are that can run how they do it.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yes. In the 1840s, this is the Second Great Awakening. Again, more men on horses. But it's the 1840s, so we have a little bit more technological advanced things, but it's mostly men on horses. This is where you have the revivals, and we're bringing the unchurched in. We start having Bible camps, Bible retreats. So when we get into our episode about women's retreat, like,
We can thank the 1840s.
40s. Exactly.
Thank you, 1840s.
This is also the rise of the mindset of the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Mormons, the Seventh-day Adventists in America. This is the Restoration movement. Churches want to return to proper Christianity. We're going to focus on the Lord's Supper. We're going to remind everyone that they're called to purity. Jesus is the Son of God. Church has to be on a Sunday. We're called to restore to first century church, which I think this is so funny because come as you are, really focused on we should be an Acts chapter 1 type of church.
Yeah.
And
And I think that's a huge non-denominational movement anyway, is that returning to Acts chapter 1. And that could be a whole other episode. I have a lot of opinions about that. But I'm like, oh, wait, that's not what this episode's for.
But again, not a new idea, 1840s. At this point in time, I got very, very curious. So as I was researching the history of the church in America, I also wondered, how did that overlap with women in America? So this is where I started like looking at those things of what women were allowed to do. And it's kind of funny because as we move forward, you're going to see this battle between women's rights and Christianity almost.
Wow. I think it's also like, that's an interesting point to be like, that's going to continue the storyline at this point.
Yes.
But also the fact that it's very clear at this point to see that America started, we didn't want the Church of England, so we went our own way. But then we went, oh, wait, no, we got to come back this way. And then there was a, oh, wait, that's too far. We got to come back this way. And every time that we've made these big shifts, because they happened so many years apart at this point, we've made these big shifts that more and more denominations started coming forth. And so we're ping-ponging. And it's easy to like overlook these movements. They're moving because they're moving so far apart. But as we continue at this point too, the history of women, the history of the church, but also you're going to see that ping-ponging happen more frequently.
Yeah.
And it's still just a continued ping pong back and forth. And then more denominations.
Exactly.
And denominations start splitting within denominations.
Yeah.
Like, it's so crazy. Okay, go ahead. I'm so intrigued.
So 1848, that is the first time. It's called the Married Women Act, and it says women can inherit property. So it's like if you were married and your husband died, you could inherit your property. It wouldn't have to go to another man.
That's crazy that that wasn't you forget
Yeah.
being in 2024,
Yeah.
especially as a woman with all the rights that we do have, you forget that there was a time when you weren't even valued enough as a wife that if your husband died, that you could inherit his property
Yeah.
in America.
You could stay in the house that you
Yeah.
were raising your children in.
Right? Go ahead.
Yes. Which is, if you think about it now in the church, this is a very fundamental, you want to set as a man, you have to be the provider. You have to set your family up because heaven forbid something happened to you, they need to be taken care of. That mindset, that's not a well, the men of God have always felt this way. 1848, man.
Right.
So in the 1850s, we see the creation of the YMCA. So again, this is a Christian organization.
Yeah, young men's Christian organization.
Yep.
Right?
Association.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh yeah, that does start with an O.
And but the same year that the YMCA is founded is the same year as the National Women's Rights Convention, and basically the start of women's suffrage. So in 1860, this is the Act Concerning Rights and Liabilities of Husbands and Wives is what this is called. And this is saying that women are joint guardians of their children.
And again, what year?
1860.
In 1860, guess what, women? You can now be a legal parent to your children. Oh my God.
Yes.
And now, how many single moms we got? Can we go back to the
Exactly. But
nope, sorry, I'm not a legal guardian of my children. Somebody will have to do something. He took off. I don't know what to tell you.
But again, we look at this, that this is an ingrained, inherent Christian value that moms, you are given this privilege and this amazing blessing to be able to raise your children. And God gave your children to you. Well, he didn't give them to you until 1860. 1862 was this. 1862 is the first time this guy named John Nelson Darby came to the U.S., basically saw the state of the church in the United States and decided this is the first public thinking of the concept of the rapture.
Wow.
So this whole idea that the book of Revelation is the rapture and all of this, that wasn't even a thought until 1862. How many years? That's almost 2,000 years since that book was written that we had the thought of what the rapture is.
Well, and part of me is did this dude come to America and he's like, oh my goodness, this makes the book of Revelation make so much sense.
Well, so he believed in dispensationalism,
yeah.
which is basically God deals with humanity differently depending on what era you live in.
Yes.
So he comes to America and he's like, oh
man, I didn't understand that.
God's gonna deal with you. You guys are wow. So we have this mindset at this point. Everyone is kind of like this post-millennial mind thinking.
Yes.
So this is, the world is going to get better and better and better. And we're going to share the gospel, and we have all of these social movements, the temperance movement, Reformation, all of these things. All of this is happening, and we're going to make the world a better and better and better place. Then once we get it to a good spot, then Jesus will come back. So we all have to work super, super hard to get it there faster so Jesus will come back faster.
Yes. Yeah, this is the go get everybody saved so Jesus can come back movement.
This is the golden age of Christianity, right? And this is the collective belief pretty much across the board, is this post-millennial mindset. And so when John Nelson Darby comes over and like we have this first idea of we could have rapture, this kind of starts making people think a little differently. Then 1864, we have something huge happen in our country. We are thrown into a civil war. We have neighbors fighting against each other. We have family members fighting against each other. And we've basically ripped our country in half. Also, during the time of Civil War, we have the rise of Darwinism and socialism. And all of these things are rising because of this turmoil that's being caused in our country. And then you throw in there this whole like thought of a rapture and Jesus coming back and what is that going to look like and all of these things. So then as the dust settles from the Civil War, now all of a sudden we have a huge collective mindset from postmillennialism to premillennialism. So again, we thought in postmillennialism, we have to make the world better and better and better, and then Jesus will come back. Now we've completely shifted, and the world is crap. Everything is just going to get worse and worse and worse and fall apart until it all goes up in flames, and then Jesus is going to come back. This is where you get your Left Behind series. This is where Ken Ham, Mark Driscoll, John MacArthur, all of these men, these things that they have hung their hat on and completely said this is right. This didn't start till after the Civil War.
Right.
And this is also where we might as well use the world up. It's disposable anyway. 1866 is the American Equal Rights Association. They are founded focusing mostly on bringing equal rights to both women and blacks. So we've had a civil war, and we've agreed as a country slavery should not be a thing. And yes, we have quite a few years until, even today, racism is a thing. But even quite a few years of Jim Crow laws and all of this kind of stuff, we just kind of lump women in there with it. Of like, oh, well, yeah, like we should.
I guess we should care about them too.
If we're going to fight for the blacks, we should probably fight for the women too, I guess. I don't know. So how does the country respond to all of this? In 1868, the 14th Amendment defined the word citizens and voter as male. And 1 year later, my home state, Wyoming is just a territory at this time. They respond to that by being the first place to let women have unrestricted voting rights.
Woo, go Wyoming.
Had to throw that in there.
You're like, I'm from Wyoming. Now the fact that she's a strong, opinionated woman makes so much sense.
1873. Now we have to form the anti-suffrage society because there's too many women with opinions.
Wait a minute. It was enough that we let men. We have to let women is too much.
Susan B. Anthony is fined in 1873 also, fined $100 after being put on trial for registering to vote. She didn't even vote. She registered to vote.
$100.
She registered to vote. This is also the year that the Evangelical Alliance said that the biggest threat to Christianity is modern criticism.
It's so crazy. Like, you have to really just let that sink in for a minute. Like,
1873.
This is a good place to just hit pause and be like, interesting that the biggest threat to evangelicalism is modern criticism. Yep. Okay, go.
Now we have a podcast to put it in. The 1880s is the age of reform. We have to make public health reforms. We have to have unions. We have work reform. We have child labor laws. We have all of these things, right? Because we are in this industrial revolution. All of this stuff is happening in America, and we realize like we're abusing people.
Right. We have to do something about that.
And we have to do something about that. This also causes a huge split in Christians. there's a giant split. So you have the social gospel, more liberal, if you want to look at that, looking at save the person from the crap they're going through now, save the person, help them get food in their, like Jesus came, he healed the sick, he fed the hungry, he, all of these things. Go be that to people now, and then invite them into the kingdom. Like following that example of Jesus, right? This is very much the love thy neighbor concept.
Right. And it follows along with what was going, along with in America, because you ended up having a lot of like poverty and people on the streets with
Oh
the
yeah, this is
Industrial
where like
Revolution.
people are like selling their children
Yeah.
and like
Yeah.
horrible things are happening in America this time. The split is you have the evangelicals. More conservative, if you wish. They believe we are going to save your soul. The world's going to hell in a handbasket. It's just going to keep getting worse and worse till Jesus comes back anyway. So it's futile to try to fix everyone's problems now. We're worried about your soul. We're worried about your forever,
Yeah.
your eternity. And we're going to focus on the conversation surrounding total biblical truth. The best thing we can do for you is helping you understand biblical truth, understanding who Jesus is, because in this life we will face many troubles, but Jesus came to save everyone, and you have to have accepted him and have salvation and all of those things in order for him to save you from the trouble of this world.
Right.
So we're going to focus on that. Huge, giant split, right? 1894, a teacher in Illinois, a female teacher, had to get permission from men during the summer to continue teaching kids, but in the summertime, they would just learn Bible stories.
Ooh.
This is the start of VBS. 1889, again, just my own little thing in here. Wyoming is invited to join the union. They say, we won't join if you take away the women's right to vote. We've been letting them vote for years now.
Yeah, Wyoming didn't burn down, so I think it's a good idea.
Yep. So we're not joining the union until you agree that we can let women vote. In the 1900s, this is like women's suffrage really takes off. There's like marches all over the place. 1916, Wilson platforms his presidency on the idea of women's suffrage. November 14th, 1917 is known as the Night of Terror. Women were picketing outside of the White House for suffrage. And they were arrested for obstructing traffic. Because recently a law was passed that you cannot be arrested just for picketing women's suffrage.
Right.
There has to be a reason. So they were arrested for obstructing traffic. And they were 24 women, were dragged out of their jail cells by the jailers and beaten, some of them to death, and raped in the middle of the street. For standing up for their right to be
vote.
just to
Have
be
to be a
considered
citizen.
equal.
Yeah.
This is also when the U.S. joined World War. Many men came home and they fell away from their faith because we're not offering them any real help. They go to war, they come back, they don't know how to cope with things, and they're told, just go to church. Just, it'll be fine. Because of inventions like radios and phones and all of this kind of stuff, women were able to operate those things. And so women volunteered in organizations and home efforts. Most at this point in World War I, most of them were upper class women who their family could afford for them to go and help out with the war efforts. Lower and middle class were more likely to be a nurse in the war efforts, but more than likely they had to, if your husband went off to war and you had a farm, you had to figure out how to run the farm. So they were just trying to survive and keep from completely going under until the men came back. In 1919, the 19th Amendment passes, which gives women the right to vote nationwide. So the 1920s, 60% of Americans own radios. Preachers were preaching from the pulpit that this is an invention straight from Satan. It will bring evil into your home, and warning people not to buy a radio. This is also the time of Prohibition.
Yeah, we got to ping pong back too.
Yes. Yes.
Wait, we
have
send
these...
men off to war. Now they're drinking themselves out
Now,
of their PTSD. Oh, wait, now we have to have Prohibition.
Yes, exactly. In 1923, the first VBS curriculum is printed and distributed.
What?
1925 is the Scopes trial, which is basically like they were arguing whether or not they should teach evolution.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not even going to attempt to touch that. Our friend Chris Strand on his podcast, the Truth Podcast,
does an
amazing job of that. So I suggest
episodes on this whole.
Yeah, like he did a whole series on the Scopes trial.
trial.
So I encourage you to go listen to him if you are more interested in that. The 1930s is the Great Depression. This is the rise of the conservative Christians. We are going to pray the bad away. Life sucks. America sucks. Everything is terrible. We all need to pray. And if we are better Christians and we just pray harder, the bad will go away. 1942, we enter World War II. Quickie marriages are the norm. U.S. is more financially invested than in World War I, so you get like the Rosie the Riveters. The entire nation, so much stuff, so much production of things stop in order to help the war efforts. It's insane. Churches suffer because they have no resources now. Every ounce of expendable resource is going into the war efforts. We also have the invention of the television, around this time. So 10% of households have televisions. Most everyone owns a radio now. And everyone, even though just a few years earlier, we were being warned by the pastors not to have a radio, pastors are using the radio to give messages of hope to people who are struggling because the entire country is thrown into this world war.
Right. So now radios are okay.
Radios are okay now. The men return home, but we have a little bit of an issue when the men return home from war. 80% of the women who went to work were like, ooh,
we like this working thing.
I kind of like this. It gives me purpose. It gives me fulfillment. Yes. So 80% of women wanted to keep the jobs they had. That's a big problem because now these men are suffering the cost of war more than ever. There's no mental health help anywhere. We have this baby boom, this propaganda starts because, well, if the women are pregnant, they can't be at work. The men can go to work. That means they're not sitting at home drinking,
thinking their wives,
thinking about how terrible the war was. So we got to give them purpose. We got to get them back to work. So let's get the women pregnant. Plus, I mean, you do have, it's a very romanticized idea of the men come home from war and they've missed you and you've missed them and now you can start a family. But if you look at the bigger picture, there is some propaganda in that because we need the men to go back to work because the men being left at home without a purpose after fighting in this war is not good for them mentally, socially, anything. And this is the lowest church attendance in American history.
Wow. Even lower than like
It's
COVID?
so in today,
Yeah.
in so the last stat I found was in 2023.
Yeah.
We are comparable
Wow.
to post World War II.
Oh.
Men didn't go and fight in the war and then come home and jump into church and praise God.
Right.
We had some struggles.
Yeah.
1950s, Eisenhower joins the church after getting elected. He becomes the first president to get baptized while in office.
Oh, okay.
This is the start of the Billy Graham Crusades. 1854, we add under God to the Pledge of Allegiance. That was not there until 1954. This is also Brown versus the Board of Education. Brown versus the Board of Education in 1954 is huge because this says that you cannot keep in a public school. Blacks have the same rights to go to school as whites do. This is a problem. This is a huge problem because white men in the South hated the idea of their pure, meek, proper white daughter sitting next to a black boy. We don't like that.
Yeah.
That's problematic. And so we have the start of, like, they called them segregation academies.
Yeah.
We have the rise of these private Christian schools in America, and we give them names like Thomas Road Baptist School.
Yeah.
And all of these like Christian-based names.
Yeah.
And it was all founded in order to keep the white
Segregation
kids
in the school.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, just for funsies to point out, because the Southern Baptist Convention wasn't righteous enough. We've had the Southern Baptist Convention in America for quite a few years at this point. But they didn't think that they were quite strict enough. So Jack Hyles in 1957 starts the independent fundamental Baptist movement because
Yeah. Like I said, our denominations are starting to break into
Yes.
denominations.
So we are at the 1960s now. The civil rights movement is huge. The Pentecostal movement is huge. This is the rise of the thinking of like the hypocritical Christian. We're questioning how these organizations are handling their funds, these religious institutions. You have the rise of the IBLP with Bill Gothard. You have the rise of the FLDS. The South is called the Bible Belt for a reason, because all of this stuff is taking place in the South at this point. 1970s, we have culture wars. Everything is politically motivated at this point. Women are finally allowed to have credit cards, but we also have 90% of households own a television. So if you look at, and this is in the 1970s, so just right after World War II, 10% of Americans own televisions, and they are evil.
Well, yeah, because the radio was evil, but then the radio was fine. So then it's the TV is evil.
Yes. Now
the TV's fine.
Now the TV's fine.
Because everybody has one. It's not
And
going
we
away.
have gospel shows. We have Jim and Tammy Faye Baker. We have the Kenneth Copeland Show, Jerry Falwell Sr., Billy Graham, Max Lucado, John MacArthur. This is the rise of the Jesus movement, the Jesus freaks. We're restoring the philosophy and returning to the early church. We're counterculture and all of this radical. We're living simply. We're looking for miracles and signs and wonders and healings. The Jesus movement spread across college campuses, like huge, right? 1974, Roe v. Wade. 1976, Newsweek calls it the year of the Evangelical. Jerry Falwell Sr. starts his I Love America rallies, but really he starts this because of his private Christian school
Yeah.
that he started is failing, and he's running out of money. He's got to drum up money somehow, right? So he decides, I'm getting in the political game.
Yeah.
Everything is politically driven now. Why can't Christianity be politically driven? This is the start of the 7 Mountain Mandate, also called like the 7 spheres of influence. I'm going to do a whole Patreon episode just on that.
Oh, yeah.
Because there's so much just in that. This is also where the IRS comes in, and they're like, your little private Christian schools with your little white kids, that's illegal. You can't do that. That's segregation. So if you're going to do that, we're going to take away your tax exempt status. So these churches, these men decide we can't have that happen. This is a bad thing for us, right? So Jimmy Carter is a Democrat. He's an openly Christian president. And even today, he's considered one of the kindest, most generous presidents, right? So in 1977, Focus on the Family is founded. 1979, Falwell Sr., who did that I Love America tour and all of that, and a good number of those TV evangelists, the ones who weren't involved in scandals by this point, all basically come together with like Charles Stanley, Tim and Beverly LaHaye, Jesse Helms, Robert Grant, and they decide they are founding the moral majority. They decide we're tired of the government telling us what to do, so guess what? Christians are going to go into the government. We are going to
Represent.
So they start the moral majority. They defy Baptist tradition and start mixing politics with church. They are looking to advance Christian social issues. They went up against the Catholic and Jewish leaders of the day. They approached Carter and said, we will back you, and we can guarantee that you will have a second term. You need to come out and you need to say, we're going to outlaw abortion. And he's like, well, like, as the president of the United States, I work for the people. So why I personally might not agree with it, I can't tell other people what to do.
Right. He didn't feel like the government should have a say in that.
The government should have a say in that. They were like, fine, we'll find someone else. They find Reagan.
Enter. Whatever.
Almost
find an actor.
Almost like they found an actor
to be a president
to recite some lines. And Reagan becomes the 40th president.
And as they guaranteed Carter he would win, it turns out they took their guarantee to Ronald Reagan.
That was in 1981. So in this time, the 80s and the 90s, this is the non-denominational movement. Again, we have no rules. There's no accountability. There's no education required. You can do whatever you want in the name of religion. This is the start of the big homeschool movement. People have homeschooled since the beginning.
Right.
Like, this isn't, we live 40 miles from school. You were on the farm. We're going to homeschool you. This isn't, I really feel called to do this with my family. This is, if you are a good Christian person,
this is what you do.
You are homeschooling your kids. You need to save them from the evils of the world. This is the rise of Christian nationalism. We have the Oklahoma City bombing. We have Waco. We have the Olympic bombing. All of these things are rooted in this twisted Christian nationalist. I have rights just because I'm an American and I believe in God.
Right.
TV preachers are now outdated. No one wants TV preachers. We need to focus on creating a church experience within the church. This is the rise of focus on the family. Your family is important. Your family should be in church, and your church family is important. This is where churches start using the slogans, you're home, you belong here. We're a family. We're blessed beyond measure, blessed and highly favored. Now you have Christian pop culture. Christians have magazines, they have contemporary music, they have movies, they have books. In 1989, though, the moral majority disbands. They're like, well,
There's
we
probably some scandal there, but
oh
you
yeah,
know, you can go read on that on your own.
there's more that goes into that.
A
But
fun rabbit trail. Keep going.
yes. But they basically say like, "Oh, we achieved our goal." And the religious right is solidly in place.
Right.
They firmly believed that
Their groundwork set up the stage for the
yeah,
rest of America
yes,
into the future.
into the future as a solely Christian nation. 1992 is the first website, and as the internet grows, satanic panic is just all over this
First it was
thing.
radio, then the TV. Now it's the internet.
Yes. I mean, people are this is the mark of the beast. If you have the internet in your home.
Oh, I remember this. Yeah.
Yes.
That was nice.
Mm-hmm. In 1994, Financial Peace University is launched. And in 1998, Come As You Are is founded.
Just right in the throes of all of this.
Yes.
American history. American church history.
You enter the early 2000s. The Duggars get the hit TLC show. 19 Kids and Counting, whatever, if you started like back when it was, just like 1 hour documentaries, now we have a whole show about it. Churches have websites. This is the Catholic Church sex abuse scandal. But again, internet is fine. We have websites, but people are starting like social media is the downfall of the American youth. We need to bring America back together because you have chat rooms and all of this. So all these kids who, back in the 60s who were talking on the phone all the time and that was awful.
Yeah.
Now they're chatting in an online chat room and that's awful. So we have the rise of purity culture, the rise of marriage books, video-based Bible studies. In 2008, we have President Obama, which is a Christian man. The Obamas are Christian. But it was preached from pulpits across America that he said he wanted everyone to be Muslim and he wanted the Quran in schools. Never said it.
Right.
But again, we need an enemy. We need a common enemy that we can all fight against. In the 2010s, pastors, now all of a sudden, the social media isn't the downfall of American youth. We need this. Pastors become influencers. We have YouTube, we have Facebook, we have Instagram. Services are streamed so that we can show people we care for everyone. The term deconstruction becomes an issue for the church.
Wow, all the way back in 2010?
Yep, in the 2010s, so in that decade.
Oh, okay. So between 2010
is when
and
the term deconstruction becomes a problem.
To grow. Wow.
Our Christian nationalist attacks become a norm. You have Pulse nightclub, you have school shootings, and this isn't a political stance against gun violence or anything like that. But if you look at the people who commit these crimes and go in and perform these tragedies, a lot of them have this weird, twisted Christian nationalist belief going on behind them. If the Christians aren't the ones doing the attacking, then we have this narrative like, well, this is a consequence of sin, and this is what's happening to the world, and the world is falling apart, and we need Jesus to come back, and our thoughts and prayers are with you. Pastors have public indiscretions, and they have these like tearful apologies in the 2010s. You have multiple pastors who are like caught in adultery or, are caught embezzling money and stuff like that. And they have these big public, like tearful, like, I'm so sorry. I can't believe I did this. 2016, Trump is elected president. COVID happens in 2020. Churches finally have to practice what they've preached all these years, and collectively, churches fail at doing that. We have this division and these politics flood into the American church. Scandals don't include tears anymore. So much stuff comes out during COVID, and we don't even offer public apologies anymore. It's just like, well, that happened. Okay. Christians start saying the quiet things out loud.
Mhm.
We start saying the quiet things out loud more and more and more. This gets so, I could do a whole TED talk on this, because this is finally what woke me up
Right.
and got me to see what was going on at Come As You Are.
Yeah.
Was the quiet stuff was being said out loud.
Yeah.
We have the January 6th insurrection. We have Turning Point USA, the rise of Moms for Liberty. So in all of this history that we just covered, the whole point of doing this was, as we are going through the rest of our timeline, you have to see how ingrained some of this dogma is in us, because we've established these beliefs that we have held on so tight to, that are the beliefs of all Christians, all places, that were founded by Jesus himself, are 200 years old.
Yeah, if that, a lot of them. And it's interesting to see, and I don't know about like our listener, like for me going through this timeline, it's like I can pinpoint, I know where I was born in this timeline. I
Mhm.
know the dogma that I have been spoon-fed my entire life. Like you just look at from, the 70s till now, like it's a wonder. Like I believe the things I believe, and that I did the things that I did, and I do the things I do because I was born right at a pinnacle point in our nation's church history where you're like, well, yeah, like duh.
Yeah. And so I want to end this episode with, because we've talked about this ping ponging back and forth. We've talked about this, like the radio was bad, the telephone was bad, the TV was bad, the internet was bad, social media was bad. All of these things are bad, but then eventually the church starts using them, but eventually they go back to thinking they're bad again.
Yeah.
Right? No one trusts a TV evangelist anymore.
Right.
Why? Because the Christians ruined it. So I want to end with this list. I'm not trying to make any sort of political statement. I'm not trying to call anyone out, but this is what we're talking about, because this, as we move forward, I was all in these beliefs. I was ready to take on the system. I was ready to take on everything, because I believe so deeply in the church and in Christian America and all of these things. And these are things that have caused outrage in the church. Like, not just people are upset, like people have died because there's been outrage in the church. Again, TV, radio, the telephone, the internet, war on Christmas, Black Lives Matter, the feminist movement, porn and sex industry, gay rights, abortion, liberals, woke agenda, trans people, the LGBTQ alphabet, books, just books, public education, Muslim, Catholics, anti-Confederacy, slavery movement, the Salem witch trials, Rosie the Riveter. People were mad at Rosie the Riveter. This, like, a huge fundamental thing in our country. When the men came back and the women want to stay at work, all of a sudden Rosie the Riveter is problematic. And it's anti-Christian to be Rosie the Riveter. MTV, alcohol, pot legalization, drugs, the hippie movement, rock and roll, dancing.
I know, poor Elvis.
I know. Dancing. White Nazi groups, LA riots, autism, vaccination, masks, protesters, the satanic panic of the 80s. Like, being left-handed, mental health, SEL, CRT, Barbie, SpongeBob, drag queens, club sports. Like, all of these things are things that people have been so passionately against in the name of God that if we stop and we ask ourselves why,
Do you even know?
like why? And like some of these things, like, no, drugs are bad. I agree wholeheartedly. But why as Christians,
Why is it our fence line that we stand on to talk about what we're against? Like, why is it
yes.
a Christian movement? I guess that's like,
Yes. And why does the idea of defending a Christian idea overshadow the calling from Jesus to love people?
Burning Butterflies is a listener-supported podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by our amazing supporters on Patreon.
Follow the link in our show notes to learn how you can become a Patreon supporter too. Supporters get exclusive access to bonus content each month, including outtakes, cut content, and supporter-only episodes. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave us a rating on your listening platform.
Burning Butterflies is a production of Asha Media. Thank you for listening.